All right, we are back with a special episode of App Stories, and we've got a whole series of these coming out this week. We've got daily episodes, Tuesday through Friday, going over everything related to WWDC. So we will be talking about that throughout the week. We have 3 sponsors for this episode, and that is Raycast, Backplays, and Pingdom. Federico Vitici, how was your WWDC going so far? How did you like that keynote? What's your like big picture thought about what we saw this morning?
Well, you're already asking about big picture thoughts.
I know, but give me your like gut reaction to it, I guess. Not your conclusion, not your what you think the philosophy is, but kind of how did it strike you when you watched it?
Okay, so gut reaction. I thought it was surprising that we didn't see any major updates to WidgetKit or home screen customization. That seemed to be almost certain. Going into this WWDC, we all thought that Apple was going to respond to the massive, adoption of iOS 14 widgets and home screen customization with something, and effectively we got nothing on that front. So that was my immediate reaction. I thought, it's interesting that they didn't do anything for WidgetKit or for customizing your home screen or your OS, your iPhone, with different colors and different icons. And the second thought, I know that a lot of folks are disappointed in the fact that iPadOS 15 did not gain like any pro apps made by Apple or Xcode, even though we got a brand new Swift Playgrounds that can build apps on iPad, or support for external displays. But I think it's pretty remarkable what Apple did in effectively answering to the community and saying, you want to have keyboard shortcuts for everything? There you go. You want to have a new multitasking menu? There you go. You want to have a shelf after all these years? It's not the shelf that I imagined, in the sense it's not a clipboard manager. It's a new UI for browsing open windows on iPad, but we got that. So I think Apple answered a lot of the criticism for iPad multitasking like that. And the third sort of big picture idea, I think it revolves around automation and shortcuts. We saw shortcuts come to the Mac, and Apple just going out and saying we believe shortcuts is the future of automation on the Mac, and all the things they're gonna do to keep support for Automator, but also allow you to import your Automator workflows in shortcuts. New Mac-only actions for shortcuts. I think there's a fascinating argument there for the future of automation on Apple platforms. And I guess really, if I could add another big picture thought, my sort of first reaction is that I was expecting a little more on the iOS side. This version, so far, it sort of reminds me of iOS 12. Like, not a lot of groundbreaking updates, a lot of focus on consumer features, so messages, FaceTime, with a lot of functionalities that are undoubtedly inspired by the pandemic. Some of them, they feel a little late. Fortunately, I would add, like, it feels, at least to me, it feels a little late that now you can watch movies with, remotely with friends and family over FaceTime, or listen to music, because now that we're all, again, fortunately, at least here in Italy, we're getting vaccinated and we can meet up, we can hang out with friends again. Those features, they feel a little late to the party. Could have been more useful last year. So I actually texted you guys this in our shared iMessage group. Like, these pandemic features, they feel a little late.
They do feel a little late, although I will push back on that a little bit, because while they would have been even more helpful in 2020, the fact remains that people have friends and family all over the place. And, you and I might want to share an album that we're listening to or something sometime, and we're not together, most of the year. So there is a use case for it, I think. And I'm glad to see it, notwithstanding the fact that I would have, killed for this feature last summer as opposed to this summer. Yeah, Federico, on the shortcuts too, it's my understanding that, apps that are coming over that are Mac Catalyst apps or iOS or iPadOS apps that are running on an M1 Mac natively built on iOS, that the shortcuts from those are going to work on the Mac too. I mean, there are going to be some limitations because obviously the platforms are different and they do things differently. But by and large, shortcuts, for instance, like for Timery or whatever, should work just as well on the Mac as they do on the iPad or iPhone. So I'm really looking forward to that aspect.
Nice.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Raycast, our official WWDC sponsor. It's time for you to say goodbye to Spotlight and say hello to Raycast. Raycast is a native Mac super tool that eclipses and extends Spotlight's functionality. With the press of a keyboard shortcut, Raycast launches apps and a whole lot more. You can do all sorts of things, like search and access your files, use third-party apps and services like Google Workspace, GitHub, Jira, Asana, Linear, and a whole lot more. Check your schedule and join a Zoom meeting with a single keystroke, access your clipboard, set a reminder, take a quick note, control system functions on your Mac, and a whole lot more. Raycast also supports quick links that lets you open files, folders, and URLs. Quick links can even accept input, allowing you to do things like execute search queries right from inside Raycast. I set one up for when I want to run a search on MacStories, and it's fantastic. The app has a snippets system now, too, allowing you to avoid repetitive typing. You can do things like send canned email messages, drop frequently used code into your IDE, or grab your company's brand colors with ease. Raycast is also extensible with scripts. In fact, there are over 400 that have been created by its active user community. Scripts let you control all sorts of apps like Bear, CleanShot, Craft, and Things, to name just a few. It's pretty cool. Because Raycast is native, it behaves exactly how you'd expect, and it's fast and responsive. It's also actively developed with a keen focus on privacy. Together, Raycast's powerful features keep you focused on what's most important to you. You avoid inefficient context switching and eliminate clutter. Download Raycast for free right now at raycast.com and give it a try to level up your productivity. Again, that URL is raycast.com to download the app for free. I'll put a link in the show notes, too. Our thanks to Raycast for their support of the show and our WWDC coverage at MacStories. Why don't we maybe walk through one by one the OSs real quickly and kind of give our first impressions. I agree with you on iOS. I was a little surprised it seemed a little light on features, and I do kind of wonder whether we're heading into sort of a TikTok pattern between iPadOS and iOS, because I think iPadOS really got the lion's share of interesting features this year, at least on a more fundamental level with some of the multitasking and things like that. But there's some really nice quality of life things here in iOS too. Messages is an app that I use just so often that even the smallest changes make a big difference to me. And I think, for instance, this new feature called Shared with You is nice, and also it seems to be a bit of a theme across some of these features, which is linking things for context. Because just like a quick note can have a link in it back to the original email message or web page or whatever it is where you took the note, the Shared with You feature allows you to see who it is who shared something with you, whether it's a photo or a link or a song or whatever it happens to be, and then tap on a link in that shared with you section of whatever app it happens to be, and go back to messages and see the context of your conversation. So if I'm in Apple News and I see that you shared this article with me, I can actually tap on that from the news app and go back to our conversation. And I find that kind of thing really valuable because I think everybody's had the experience of trying to scroll backwards through messages to find context for some sort of conversation. And it's not super easy. And this is going to make that a lot better.
Right. And I think it's interesting that the example that you mentioned with the Apple News integration, it's fascinating to me that Apple seems to be sort of using the News app as an inbox for those links, even though those links, they may not necessarily be links to stories on Apple News. So if one of your friends shares a link to, say, MacStories.net in iMessage, and that link will appear in the Shared with You section of the News app, even though it's not an Apple News link, story link. It's a standard, MacStories.net URL, but it'll show up in there. So this shared with...
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm looking.
Are you sure
I'm
about
looking
that?
at it right now. It's showing.
Okay. Well, I know you've downloaded it and I haven't, but there is also a shared with you section in Safari, I believe.
So
too.
yes, I was about to say that shared with you is more like a layer that is available in a variety of apps. So you can find share with you in the start page of Safari. You can find it in Apple Music in the Listen Now page. So there's this sort of system-wide shared with you feature, and of course in Photos as well. I think it's interesting that Apple is tying, this is one of those cases of Apple taking advantage of the integrations that they have between different frameworks, between different apps, and everything is sort of tied together by iMessage, which I think is also an interesting angle, right? You can use iMessage to share all kinds of content with your friends, and later you can go back to those conversations from a variety of apps, Music News, Safari, what else? Photos, right? All of these apps are integrated with iMessage. So I think that's an interesting angle for sure. What I'm keen to play around with, I just installed the beta on my iPhone and iPad a few hours ago, is the new Focus and the revamped notification support in iOS and iPadOS. So the focus would be, the ability to create different statuses, basically. So you can have a focus for, personal downtime, or you can create a focus for work, or you can create even custom, like a custom status for, say, reading or playing video games. And basically, a focus is like a specialized do not disturb mode that allows you to set up filters for apps. So you can say, when I'm in work focus mode, I just want to be notified by Slack or by these people, and I just want to silence everything else, right? And you can imagine how you will be able to create different focus modes for, for example, I'm going to set up one for reading right away that will enable do not disturb. Maybe, just allow critical notifications to come in from certain people, block all notifications for all kinds of apps. But also focus can be used as a trigger in automation in shortcuts. And so you could do things like, when I enter the reading focus mode, start this timer in the Timery app, right? And you can imagine how you could do that for, say if I create a focus for recording podcasts, right? I could say I'm recording a show, therefore enable do not disturb, allow messages to come in from this group, and start a timer in Timery for my podcast project. So all those sort of things, you can do that with Focus, which you can access from Control Center, and you can also automate in shortcuts.
Right. And I think the other thing about it that's kind of important is that it actually takes effect on all of your devices at once, because I know I've had the experience where I've had a device sitting in my studio here that I forgot to mute, and it goes off while we're recording, but focus mode applies to all your devices at the same time.
Yeah, and it's really nice. I really like how sort of all these different modes are now part of Focus. So do not disturb, sleep, and there's a default personal and work mode. So, and of course, you can always create a custom one. And when you create a custom one, there are also, like as you mentioned, there are also like built-in suggestions for driving, fitness, gaming, and reading. And for example, if you pick the reading one, let's see. It's like I mentioned, it silences notifications, and this is also fascinating how you can choose to share your status with people, and you can say, for example, if Federico just entered reading mode, I can choose to show that mode in iMessage with certain people or certain threads, and I believe there's also going to be a Focus status API for developers. So that, for instance, if a participating app like Slack uses the new Focus Status API, your status in Slack will be able to match whatever you set on your iPhone. So that my colleagues on Slack, for example, may be able to see, oh, Federico is, having some personal downtime based on the status that I set from Focus in Control Center. So there's also going to be an API for third-party developers, which I think is the right way to go. John, I will enable you, I will allow you, I will whitelist you so that...
You let me break through the barriers?
I will let you break through. I will let you see when I'm entering reading time. So it's
I
pretty
see.
nice.
I thought you were going to say that I could get hold of you no matter what. I thought
No,
I get a free pass. I probably don't.
Baby steps. Come on.
All right, baby steps. All right. Yeah, no, I think it's a great feature. I'm looking forward to it. I have to think about how I want to set this up, but it is the kind of fine-grained control over notifications that I've wanted for a long time, and I think it'll be good to have, especially if you can do it on a thread-by-thread basis and things like that in messages, which will be perfect. Now, I want to ask you a little bit about SharePlay, because this seems to be a very big thing for Apple this year. And, we had the experience where I think it was like you and me and Steven and Mike, we tried to do a group FaceTime one time, and then we tried to get Jason Snell on too. And it was an early beta, and our phones all got really hot, and it didn't really work particularly well. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen to SharePlay, but it seems like it's awfully ambitious, and there's a lot going on here, because this is something that can work across messages, FaceTime, the iPhone, the iPad, the Apple TV. There's a lot going on here, and it all has to be synchronized because it allows you to do things like listen to music as a group or watch a TV show or movie. There's a lot of things that it's built to do, and it'll be interesting to me, I think, to see how well it can accomplish those with a big group, I guess, 1 and 2, across all those different kinds of devices.
Right. This is the feature that, like, as I mentioned, I don't know. I don't think I'm
going to use it much.
I don't think I'm going to use it much. I think it's going to be pretty amazing, if not downright scary, for family tech support when it comes to screen sharing. Because if your relatives get a hold of the fact that you can now share your screen with the tech savvy member of the family, they will probably request tech support very frequently. But I also think it's about time to be able to share your screen with somebody else and help them do something, or give them some tips on a video game, for example. Whatever it is, I think it's a fantastic addition. I think it's impressive that you will be able to watch movies and TV shows or listen to music together. The music one is interesting to me. I think we can do some pretty fun stuff there. But the watching TV shows and movies, that feels like a 2020 feature. And
yeah, that's the one that I really meant when I said I don't think I'll use it much. I can see the music one working, especially when you're doing it. I think that's the kind of activity I would do over text message, not like video. But yeah, I mean, I can see that one working a lot better. On the Mac too, with the screen sharing, you can share just a single window, which is kind of a cool idea too.
Yeah, that's perfect. I like it. Nice. So yeah, on iOS, what else do we want to mention on iOS? There's a bunch of privacy stuff that I think is interesting. Like, for example, iCloud Plus, which is this new version of iCloud that includes effectively like an Apple VPN, but it's not called the VPN; it's called the Private Relay.
Right.
So basically, like, it masks your IP address and your browsing activity from other websites, from apps, and basically anonymizes what you do online. It does look like a VPN to me, but of course it's not called the Apple VPN. I gotta look into like upgrading to iCloud Plus, because right now, like, I have a standard settings on my iPhone already says iCloud Plus, so I guess it's like a free upgrade. I don't know. This was very unclear.
Yeah, that was very unclear. So we'll have to see what comes of that. I think on iOS, the only other thing maybe we ought to mention before moving on is Safari, because Safari is getting quite a big redesign, and this is one that obviously is across all of the platforms, like many of these features. But the tab bar has been greatly simplified and now takes on the color of the website that you're visiting. So it really kind of blends into a seamless window at this point. And the address bar is not so much a bar anymore. It's more the site name that you tap on. And when you tap on it, then you get a smart search bar, which allows you to do searches for websites or within a page, as well as revealing other different features like translate and reader mode and things like that in a new, kind of behind a new more button. I think that's true across all three platforms. I know it's true for the Mac.
Yeah, and I can tell you that on the iPhone, it's really different. Like you have this floating.
I know, especially there.
You have this floating UI element at the bottom of the screen that shows you the domain of the current page, and there's this new menu that includes like 4 top-level buttons for Safari Reader, reading list, which is now has this cute button called Read Later, a reload button, and the share button. And then just below those 4 top-level items, you got your standard extensions. And what's really interesting here is that this UI element floats toward the bottom of the screen so that it's easier to reach with your thumb. But then you can swipe up on it to open the new tab view, which is finally no longer this vertical carousel. It's a standard grid view for your open tabs. And you can organize your tabs in tab groups. And tab groups, they will be available on all of your devices, including the Mac. All of these tab groups allow you to, these are like sets of tabs that you can rename. And so if you're doing research on a particular topic, you can switch between these groups of tabs. They live in a sidebar on iPad. I believe it's also a sidebar on the Mac. I think it's really interesting how Apple seems to be saying here, you don't have to close your tabs. If you're doing some work, you're doing some research, just organize them in tab groups. And, whatever tab you put in a group, it'll also be available on other devices.
Yeah, it's a lot like bookmarks, except that I think the idea is for them to be a little more ephemeral and temporary and contextual to what you're doing, where you can do things like, for instance, create a tab group out of all your open tabs at one time, and those kind of shortcuts that are built into it, which is really nice because that'll sync across all devices, making it easier to work across a number of different devices throughout the day. And I think the extensions thing is going to be big too, because I know, on the Mac, I don't use extensions extensively, but I do use them for things like Grammarly, which was called out during the keynote, because when you have a Grammarly extension enabled, whenever you're in a text view inside of Safari, you get spell correction and grammar correction right there in line, which is nice when you're using a web-based mail program or maybe a forum site, or I don't know, whatever it happens to be. Whenever you're putting a CMS for that matter, for us, but putting text somewhere on the web, it's nice to have that quick feedback as to whether maybe there's a red line under a word that you misspelled or something like that. So I'm looking forward to having extensions on the iPhone and the iPad. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Backblaze. Unlimited computer backups for Macs and PCs for just $6 a month. Back up all your stuff. Documents, music, photos, videos, drawings, projects, everything. Live in the EU? You can even select your data to be in the EU region when signing up for a trial. You can restore files anywhere, directly download them on the web, or restore by mail. If you restore by mail, you purchase a hard drive, and Backblaze will overnight it by FedEx. After you restore, you can return the hard drive to them for a refund. Worried about accidentally deleting files? For an extra $2 a month, you can increase your retention history to 1 whole year. Once backed up, all of your data is available anywhere you are. There's a mobile app, or you can use the web. With more than 50 billion files recovered and downloaded, you'll never face palm about forgetting your presentation on your home computer again. I've used Backblaze for years and even bought subscriptions for my kids when they went off to college. And it's been perfect for them. Get a free, fully featured, no credit card required trial today at backblaze.com/MacStories. Again, visit backblaze.com/MacStories so they know you came from the show. I'll put a link in the show notes too. That's a fully featured 15-day free trial at backblaze.com/MacStories. Start protecting yourself from potential bad times. Start today with Backblaze. Our thanks to Backblaze for their support of the show. All right, Federico, why don't we switch on over to iPadOS? And, we've already covered a lot of the core apps which have similar changes on the iPad as well as the iPhone. Why don't we talk, though, I guess, first about multitasking and exactly how this works? Because I guess you've had a little bit of a chance to play with it. Not a lot of time, but more time than me so far. So what have you discovered?
It's very different from before. So Apple is going all in on visual affordances for iPad multitasking, and that means having a menu that shows you exactly what you're doing in terms of putting an app in split view or in slide over or full screen. You can still use the old drag and drop method for picking up app icons and dragging them to a side of the screen, but the emphasis is now more on the menu that you can access from the top of the screen. There's this new ellipsis button that's always floating right there at the top, and you can click it to put the active app in full screen, split view, or slide over. And it's very clear there's 3 buttons for this. And when you create a split view, now it's a very different, like the speciality of it is very different from before. When you put an app on one side of the screen, you can pick the secondary app via the home screen. So the app that you put, say you have Twitter, right? Open in full screen. And you say, okay, create a split view, and Twitter sort of slides to the side of the screen. And on the right side, you see the home screen. So all you need to do is click on an icon. You can both click with the pointer, or you can now navigate icons via the keyboard from your iPad via an external keyboard.
Oh, interesting.
And basically, you're using the home screen as a launcher, as an application picker for split view. And it's this very clear, like it makes sense right away that you create split views, and whenever you want to switch what's on screen, you just pick it from the home screen. There's no longer a need to have like a secondary picker or to do it all via drag and drop. And you can use this menu at the top of the screen to sort of enable full screen, split view, or slide over. Or you can use keyboard shortcuts. There are now keyboard shortcuts for all of these actions. The globe key is now used as a system-wide modifier for multitasking. So you can do, for example, globe option left to tile a window to the left side of the screen. Or you can do, I believe it's globe option A to show the app library. There's all kinds of keyboard shortcuts based on the globe key, which is now the keyboard modifier for multitasking commands. It obviously, like when you first use it, is a bit of a shock. It reminds me of an old concept that I had years ago when we showed how, what if you could see like a home screen like picker on one side of one side of the screen when you want to create a split view. And now you don't see a home screen like picker. You see the home screen itself when you want to pick the other app in split view. Then Apple also did, and it's kind of funny, they also did like a menu bar. Basically, this is pretty much what we imagined, what we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. When you hold down the command key on an external keyboard, you no longer see the translucent keyboard cheat sheet in the middle of the screen. You see sort of like an upside down menu bar. You see this menu at the bottom of the screen, which is paginated. It's organized in sections, right? And it appears that developers can organize it in sections too, so they can have like keyboard groups for categories like edit and view. And all of your supported keyboard commands are listed in that menu, which is, again, it looks like a menu bar that's displayed from the bottom up rather than the top down.
Interesting.
And then what else? Keyboard integration, I already mentioned. There's a shelf, which, this is funny because people tend to associate.
This was a shocker.
That was a shocker.
This is a shocker.
But it's not the kind of shelf that I've been imagining for a long time. So the shelf appears to be the name of the new UI for seeing all the open windows for apps. It's not a shelf for sort of dropping content, like dropping arbitrary content. The shelf is basically like this row of thumbnails that shows you how many windows you have open for, say, files or for Safari. And it's app-based. So that when you click on the files icon, for example, if you have multiple files windows, you will see the shelf for files. And lastly, I think I want to mention how Apple also did 2 other things that we've been requesting for a long time. You can now open split views using shortcuts. So you can create multiple shortcuts for recreating combinations of apps. So you can do things like open Twitter and Safari side by side. And that's like a one action shortcut that will instantly create a split view for those apps. And
that's going to be really
it's going to be
handy.
real handy. And I can imagine like folks putting together like shortcuts for different setups, for different work modes. I could see something like enable work focus mode in Control Center, which triggers an automation that puts, say, Notes and Safari side by side. Like you can do that kind of thing now. And you can now also manipulate the app switcher directly. So you can mix and match, you can combine windows in split views in the app switcher. You can just hold down and drag and drop windows around, and you can combine or make apps full screen. You can do whatever you want from the app switcher itself. So it's no longer just a static preview, now it's interactive. And you can create split views from there. It's a pretty dramatic update, honestly. Maybe folks would have wanted to see a little more, like external display support, right? We're all thinking it. Maybe, maybe there could have been, I don't know. I just feel like at this point, external display support is the one big missing feature, but I'm really happy with what I'm seeing so far. I've only played with it for like 45 minutes. It's pretty remarkable what Apple has done. I think there's some real fascinating possibilities, when it comes to integrating this new multitasking with the keyboard, with shortcuts, and with focus. I think it's going to be fun to play around with that and sort of create presets when working on the iPad.
Yeah, I think it creates a lot of flexibility. And I guess the shelf, it's effectively serving the same purpose that swiping up from the bottom did, right? Is that correct, or is it something different, or is there something more to it?
So the shelf, like from what I've seen so far, it's basically just the new way to see open windows for the same application, right? But you can still use
the same application.
Yeah, for the same application. But you still have your system-wide app switcher. You still have the dock, right? It's still It's not the shelf that you thought it was going to be, but it's still called the shelf.
Right. The other thing about the iPad that I'd like to call out is Swift Playgrounds, because I think what we're seeing here is probably Apple having decided that Xcode isn't the right fit for the iPad, and that Swift Playgrounds can achieve a lot of what Xcode might have achieved if it had been brought to the iPad. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the fact that you can now actually publish an app, run and publish an app from within Swift Playgrounds on an iPad is a big step. That's a big leap forward for developing on the iPad. So I think it's terrific. There's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of UI elements now. There's documentation. There's all kinds of new things in here. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but you may not be able to make the most sophisticated app ever in Swift Playgrounds. I don't know, but it is a step forward in terms of being able to both test and publish right from the same app on the device that you're developing for.
We should mention home screen widgets, right? You can now install home screen widgets on iPad. There's a new extra large size for widgets on iPad.
It's 2x4, I think, right? A total of 8 icon spaces, essentially.
Let's see, because I just put like a giant calendar widget on my home screen. It's a 2x4, yes, and those icons obviously are more spaced out in landscape. It's a 2x4, and when you rotate the iPad, it's still a 2x4. So that's one of the benefits of having the new grid view that Apple did in iPadOS 13, I believe. So those widgets, they scale gracefully across device rotations. And there's a new, obviously, there's the widget gallery, which is sort of similar to the Mac. You have your apps on the left side, and you can switch between them and see all the different widgets. And obviously, there's a few Apple apps already have the giant widget size. Calendar, for example, has one. Who else has it? I think Files has a giant widget as well. But yeah, maybe, I think a lot of people were expecting things like widget interactivity, or they were expecting being able to bookmark documents and put documents or folders on your home screen. That is not possible, unfortunately. Real quick before we move on to macOS, John, I know that you want to say a few things about that, and watchOS, which seems to be a little more on the lighter side of updates. Couple of quick things. Shortcuts has some real nice improvements. I mentioned being able to create split views using shortcuts. There's also finally, big finally here for me, you can access any folder in the file system using shortcuts. There are new actions for getting the contents of any folder, saving files to any folder, no more bookmarks using Scriptable or Toolbox Pro. You can now do all of this natively using shortcuts. You can now fold blocks of actions in the editor. So if you have a shortcut like MusicBot, which has menus that span hundreds of actions, you can now fold those blocks and a shortcut becomes easier to scroll. There are some new interesting debugging tools for shortcuts. You have a new stop and output action, which will stop the execution of a shortcut at output and basically write to disk somewhere the output of the previous action. On the Mac, you can actually log the output to a file. On iOS, you can show it in line, or you can copy the output to the clipboard. Mm-hmm. There are some new sharing and privacy permissions. Unfortunately, no changes to the shortcuts confirmation banners, it seems.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that. I noticed that in the demos.
And obviously, there's shortcuts on the Mac, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And on the Mac, you have some new exclusive actions, including running shell scripts or scripting application windows, which I think is going to be real interesting. John is going to have a lot of fun with that feature, I bet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, look, WWDC is a week long. We're going to revisit all of this over the next few days and months. So this is just the highlights, just my first impressions for now.
This episode is brought to you by Pingdom from SolarWinds. Today's internet users expect a fast web experience. No matter how targeted your marketing content or how sleek your website is, they'll bounce if your page is loading too slowly. But with real user monitoring from Pingdom, you can discover how website performance affects your visitors' experience. So you can take action before your business is impacted, all for as low as $10 a month. Whether your visitors are dispersed around the world or across browsers, devices, and platforms, Pingdom helps you identify bottlenecks, troubleshoot performance, and make informed optimizations. Real user monitoring is an event-based solution, so it's built for scalability. This means you can monitor millions of page views, not just sample data, at an affordable price. Get live site performance visibility today with real user monitoring from Pingdom. Go to pingdom.com/signup right now for a 30-day free trial with no credit card required. Then, when you're ready to buy, use the code MacStories at checkout to get an awesome 30% off your first invoice. Again, go to pingdom.com/signup right now for a free 30-day free trial. And when you're ready to buy, use the code MacStories to save 30% off your first invoice. Thanks to Pingdom from SolarWinds for their support of the show. I think shortcuts on the Mac is that and universal control are the two things that I'm most excited about. And on shortcuts, it's pretty clear from the presentation earlier today that this is the future of automation on the Mac because you can turn automator actions into shortcuts, and it's very clearly being pitched as migrating them to shortcuts, at least the way I heard it. And so I think that that's the case, but that doesn't mean that the other technologies have been left behind because AppleScript and Shell scripts both work with shortcuts on the Mac too. So I think it's essentially what you and I have talked about many times about what we'd like to see with shortcuts on the Mac, not an abandonment of the legacy automation tools that have been on the Mac for a long time and served a lot of people very well, but an evolution of that and using shortcuts to tie it all together. And shortcuts does work across. It's not clear to me yet to what degree you can run a shortcut on your Mac and have it execute something on your iOS device. I need to do some messing around with that and try it. What I do know, though, is that if you have an app, as I mentioned before, that works across all platforms, the shortcuts across all those platforms will work too, except to the extent one platform doesn't have a certain feature that is required by that shortcut. And there will be some of that, but for instance, Mac Catalyst apps, which are built to work on the iPad and on the Mac too, those should largely work across all systems. Things like, as I said, Timer is one that I think of a lot because we use it so often to start and stop timers with shortcuts. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes and what you can do if you open up the app. From what I've seen so far, and I don't have the beta installed yet because I haven't had time to do that, but it looks an awful lot like what you see on the iPad. It's very much, the sidebar on the left, and you have your gallery and you have your library of actions, and you put things together by chaining actions together and setting the parameters. It's going to be very familiar for a lot of people, and I think that'll help people get up and running and creating shortcuts in no time flat. And I anticipate starting doing that before the week is out, because this is going to be, I think, already looking down the road towards my Monterey review in the fall. This will obviously be one of the tentpole parts of that review, is putting together some shortcuts and working with that sort of thing. But beyond shortcuts, Federico, universal control is really exciting because it's kind of like automatic sidecar. Sidecar was, you had to invoke it. But with universal control, you can just have your two devices next to each other and move your pointer from one to the other. So what it allows you to do is use one keyboard, one trackpad, one mouse with multiple devices. And they demoed during the keynote as many as 3, an iMac, a MacBook Pro, and an iPad Pro, all working together seamlessly. And as I understand the way it works is that wherever your pointer happens to be, that is the device that has control of the keyboard. So as you move it from device to device, the keyboard focus changes to that particular device, which is pretty neat. And it does it all kind of automatically in the background. There's also something that I think you have to kind of go back and play the demo in slow-mo, because what happens when they first connect is there's this gray bar that appears at the border between two devices, and it has an up and down arrow there. And what it does is it's an adjustment. It's like a height adjustment thing. So for instance, if you're using an iMac, which has a screen that's up kind of high, and an iPad Pro and a Magic Keyboard, which is lower, you can adjust what portion, how those two things line up, how those two screens line up, so it's a little bit more seamlessly, so you're not like kind of moving over and then down with your pointer. I haven't tried it yet, so I'm probably not describing it perfectly well, but there's a lot of thought that's gone into how these things are going to work together, especially when you have devices that have screens at different levels depending on their size or their configuration. It all works with Bluetooth proximity and Wi-Fi, peer-to-peer Wi-Fi. You do not have to have an internet connection for it to work. However, you do have to have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth enabled on the devices because it's doing that on a peer-to-peer basis. So it's a lot like the other continuity features that Apple has introduced over the years. One thing that obviously I'm a little concerned only in that sometimes continuity can be buggy. Historically, I've found that the M1 Macs are better in this regard than the Intel Macs. My old Mac Mini has problems with it, and I have to restart it to get it working again periodically. But the M1s have been better, and I hope that the continuity features are a little more stable, because something like this I could really see myself using all the time. And another nice little tidbit that wasn't discussed during the keynote is that you can actually go into the system preferences and check off a box and have your devices paired automatically when they're in proximity all the time. So, for instance, if I walk into my studio and put my iPad Pro into a stand right next to my Mac Mini, I can have the two pair automatically without me having to have done anything or initiated the process of moving the pointer from one to the other. It just happens in the background and is ready to work the moment that I start working. So there's a lot of little nice touches in there, and I'm looking forward to really testing those out and giving them a try. All right, Federico, let's just wrap up real quickly with a few more watchOS things. We've mentioned it a little bit along the way, but it's worth noting it's a fairly light update this year, I think, but there are some changes here. We've got, for instance, a new photo face. I thought it was interesting that they said during the keynote that the photo watch face was the most popular watch face, because I don't know if I would have guessed that. It's certainly not amongst the geeky people that I know, but I guess we're not normal people. But it's a portrait photo face that allows you to create a portrait style photo of someone with the blurred background, and it's kind of layered, so you can make it look like the time, for instance, is peeking out from behind someone's head. I'm looking at some of the examples here, and it looks really nice. I mean, of course, everybody who has their photo taken in an Apple keynote is beautiful and looks perfect, and the photos are wonderful. But it looks really good, and I'm looking forward to actually trying it. Yeah, there's some other new photo stuff in there too, like some of the on this day and memories and that sort of thing that's been brought over from other platforms to be a little more integrated on the watch too.
Yeah, and there's some other interesting features on the watch that I want to play around with whenever I install the watchOS 8 beta. There's the new combined editing UI when you're sending a text. So you can scribble, you can dictate, you can scroll the cursor with the digital crown when you're sending a message, which is really cool. I like that idea of like the integrated editing and typing UI. You can... what else was new on the watch? I believe they mentioned the new support for... did they mention the support for car keys and hotel room keys on the watch as well?
Right. Right. Yeah, they already had the car key thing that isn't new, but but you could open hotel. They're going to be able to open hotel room doors. I think they announced a partnership with Hyatt, and also your home. If you have an electronic lock that's HomeKit enabled, you'll be able to do that. And there's video doorbell support, which I have a video doorbell. I'm looking forward to checking this out. They actually show the one that I have on the preview page, which is the one made by Logitech, that will show the video preview of who's at your door and give you a doorbell notification and allow you to talk to them through the intercom. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. watchOS 8 seems to me that it's a bit on the light side of updates this year. Yeah, it's kind of funny because until a couple of days ago, we thought, oh, maybe Apple is going to do custom watch faces. They're finally going to do it. But it seems to be like, maybe like you asked me at the beginning of this episode, like, what's your sort of high level, big picture thought? There's a lot of focus, I think, on refinements and stability this year. Like iPadOS is the exception, but especially on the iPhone and watchOS, maybe we are seeing that TikTok schedule you mentioned, right? We're seeing like maybe it's a quieter year. I keep thinking of iOS 12. I'm getting that feeling from iOS 15 with the focus on FaceTime and messages, and there's a big update that's Safari. Safari is really a remarkable update. I want to dig in and try and understand, like, what does it mean for my research workflow? What does it mean for reading list? I wanna see if my feeling here changes throughout the week as I keep using iOS. But right now, I'm leaning toward it. It reminds me of iOS 12. It reminds me of like it's a slightly quieter year for iOS compared to iOS 13 or 14 for sure.
Yeah, I think though too that there are some underlying quieter features here that are going to make more of a daily difference than maybe we anticipate at the outset. I mean, the focus during a keynote are on the things that are easy to demo, the things like FaceTime and so forth. But the things like Quick Note, the things like Universal Control, the things like Share With You, they're not super sexy in some ways, but I think they're going to make people's everyday lives potentially a lot easier if they work well, and help people just get work done or research or reading, whatever it happens to be, communicate with their friends, all those things. And they aren't super flashy necessarily, but I think they also could be just as useful as anything that we might have seen in some of the previous years. So I don't know. I feel like we're going to have to live with this for a while before we really make a call on this one way or the other. All right, Federico, that was a great episode. As I said at the outset of this episode, we are going to have daily updates. And, we'll put them out, I think, pretty regularly in the morning sometime, U.S. time, my time, Chicago time. It's all subject to my schedule and getting my work done. But we'll have them out Tuesday through Friday, as well as an episode of MacStories Unwind at the end of the week, kind of recapping everything, which will be a lot of fun. So I want to thank our 3 sponsors again. That's Raycast, Backblaze, and Pingdom. And I'll talk to you again tomorrow, Federico.
Ciao, John.